In the ever-charged landscape of American political discourse, few moments spark as much fire as when truth clashes with sensationalism. This was exactly the case when Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, known for her sharp intellect and unwavering stance, went head-to-head with conservative commentator Tucker Carlson. Carlson, often criticized for promoting polarizing narratives under the guise of evidence, recently attempted to push another controversial claim, but this time, he met an immovable force. With commanding clarity and unapologetic precision, Crockett dismantled Carlson's so-called facts, exposing flaws, twisting of context, and outright misinformation. Her takedown didn't just silence a segment, it sent shockwaves across media platforms, reminding viewers everywhere that in the face of calculated spin, bold truth still has the power to break through. This speech unpacks that viral moment, what it means for political accountability, and how it marks a turning point in the fight against disinformation. Jasmine Crockett's reputation for speaking truth to power has increasingly made her a formidable presence in the political arena, and her recent confrontation with Tucker Carlson further solidified her position as a sharp and fearless voice in Congress. Carlson, known for his controversial takes and often inflammatory commentary, presented a segment that he claimed was based on irrefutable evidence regarding a politically sensitive issue. The evidence, he touted, came in the form of selectively edited clips, questionable sources, and cherry-picked data points meant to fit a particular narrative. Crockett, never one to let misinformation go unchecked, responded with a precise and thorough breakdown of Carlson's claims, highlighting their inconsistencies and exposing the manipulative tactics used to give them false credibility. From the outset, Crockett's approach was methodical. She began by dissecting Carlson's main arguments, addressing each point with fact-based counterarguments backed by documentation, public records, and first-hand knowledge. She pointed out how Carlson had taken statements out of context, often omitting key pieces of information that would have dramatically changed the viewer's interpretation. For instance, where Carlson showed brief footage to support his claim, Crockett referred to the full video, revealing a vastly different narrative once the omitted parts were restored. Her ability to frame the full picture not only disarmed Carlson's argument but also exposed the manipulative editing practices that are often used to mislead the public. Crockett didn't stop at just correcting the misinformation, she went further to explain why Carlson's approach was so dangerous in the current media climate. She emphasized how such distortions, when left unchallenged, contribute to the erosion of public trust and the deepening of political polarization. Crockett made it clear that this wasn't just a disagreement of opinion, but a fight against the deliberate distortion of facts to serve an ideological agenda. She raised the stakes of the conversation by connecting Carlson's misinformation campaign to broader issues, such as voter suppression, racial bias in the justice system, and the growing threat of political violence spurred by false narratives. As she continued her takedown, Crockett referenced legal precedents, committee findings, and nonpartisan investigative reports to show how Carlson's evidence had already been debunked by credible sources. She demonstrated a mastery of detail, quoting page numbers and timestamps, leaving little room for ambiguity. This level of precision served not only to invalidate Carlson's claims but also to demonstrate that Crockett was not engaging in emotional rebuttal but in evidence-based refutation. Her background as a lawyer was evident as she built her argument like a case before a jury, systematically exposing every weak point in Carlson's narrative. One of the most impactful elements of her rebuttal was her use of Carlson's own past statements and contradictions. Crockett highlighted several occasions where Carlson had contradicted himself, revealing a pattern of shifting positions depending on political convenience. She showed clips where Carlson had supported one stance only to abandon it in favor of a newer, more provocative one, all under the guise of journalistic integrity. By holding these contradictions up to the light, Crockett effectively questioned Carlson's credibility, showing that his platform was less about informing the public and more about pushing sensational narratives to maintain viewership. Crockett's critique extended beyond just Carlson to the broader infrastructure that allows such misinformation to flourish. She called out the networks, advertisers, and political figures who enable and legitimize voices like Carlson's, arguing that accountability must go beyond just the individual. Her words struck a chord with audiences who have grown weary of political theater and are demanding integrity from both politicians and media figures. Crockett's stance resonated especially with younger voters and activists who see her as a figure willing to stand firm in the face of disinformation campaigns that have real-world consequences. Her tone throughout was firm but composed, resisting the temptation to match Carlson's often aggressive style. This contrast worked in her favor, projecting her as rational, informed, and in control, while Carlson's rhetoric appeared increasingly frantic and defensive when viewed in comparison. Crockett's calm dismantling of his arguments served to underscore the weakness of Carlson's position, proving that a solid command of facts could still outmatch sensationalism. She strategically used pauses, rhetorical questions, and direct quotes to guide her audience through the breakdown, ensuring that the facts remained the focus rather than personalities. The impact of her rebuttal was immediate. Social media platforms lit up with clips and quotes from her speech, many of which went viral, drawing attention not just from political followers but from mainstream news outlets. Her words were shared, analyzed, and praised across a wide spectrum of political commentary, from progressive blogs to academic panels. Her performance was hailed as a textbook example of how to handle disinformation in a high-stakes political setting. Critics who previously dismissed her as too outspoken or confrontational had to acknowledge the discipline and clarity with which she addressed one of the most influential right-wing voices in media. Crockett's ability to speak directly to viewers who may have been swayed by Carlson's rhetoric added another layer to her impact. She didn't just aim her rebuttal at the choir, she spoke to those in the middle, the politically curious, the unsure, the misinformed. Her argument invited them to re-examine what they had been told and to seek out the full story. In doing so, she positioned herself not just as a partisan warrior but as a defender of objective truth. This approach elevated her response from a political counterattack to a civic lesson on critical thinking and media literacy. Throughout her dismantling of Carlson's segment, Crockett also touched on the broader responsibility of elected officials to challenge falsehoods in real time. She criticized the passive acceptance of misleading narratives by many in government, arguing that silence in the face of lies is itself a form of complicity. Her speech called on her colleagues to engage more directly with disinformation, to do the hard work of challenging it head-on instead of hoping it fades on its own. This call to action added urgency to her remarks and reflected a growing demand from constituents for their leaders to be not just present but actively protective of democratic discourse. The power of Crockett's response also lay in how it connected individual accountability to systemic issues. By holding Carlson responsible for his role in spreading misinformation, she also shone a light on how those narratives ripple outward, influencing public perception, policy debates, and even courtroom outcomes. Her message was that this wasn't just about correcting one man on one night, it was about defending truth in an age when it's increasingly under siege. Her analysis drew lines between Carlson's narratives and the cultural and political movements they feed, arguing that dismantling the misinformation at the source was critical to addressing the larger injustices they support. The clash between Jasmine Crockett and Tucker Carlson is emblematic of a much larger issue dominating modern political discourse: the growing divide between carefully constructed media narratives and the underlying verified facts that often contradict them. In an age where information is weaponized and delivered through hyper-partisan channels, the confrontation served as a stark reminder of how truth can become a casualty of sensationalism. Tucker Carlson, with a substantial audience and a platform that exerts real influence over public opinion, frequently constructs stories that resonate emotionally with his viewers, regardless of their factual foundation. When Crockett confronted his so-called evidence, it was not just a political rebuttal but a public dissection of how narratives are manufactured and consumed in today's fractured media environment. Carlson's method of storytelling relies heavily on the illusion of truth. He employs emotionally charged language, selective footage, and incomplete data, often presenting these elements with absolute certainty. To the casual viewer, this presentation can appear convincing and authoritative. However, when juxtaposed with fact-checked data and full context reporting, the holes in his arguments become apparent. Jasmine Crockett's approach to this divide was to peel back the layers of misrepresentation and expose the mechanisms behind them. She highlighted how selective omission is one of the most common tools used to distort reality. Carlson might present a document or quote, but fail to disclose the surrounding information that changes its meaning entirely. Crockett's strategy was to bring these absences to light, showing audiences what they weren't being told and why it mattered. The effectiveness of her challenge lay in her ability to bridge the gap between abstract misinformation and tangible consequences. When Carlson promotes a false narrative, it may seem like mere punditry to some, but Crockett connected these distortions to real-world policy impacts and social attitudes. She gave examples of how public perception can be shaped by repeated exposure to misleading media, leading to misinformed voters, biased juries, and discriminatory legislation. By grounding her criticism in these outcomes, she moved the discussion from the realm of media critique to one of civic urgency. The narrative divide is not just an academic concern, it's a growing threat to informed democratic participation. Another powerful aspect of her rebuttal was her insistence on evidence-based dialogue. While Carlson thrives on spectacle and opinion masquerading as fact, Crockett relied on verifiable documentation. She brought forward transcripts, government records, official statistics, and full-length video excerpts to counter Carlson's clips. This created a contrast between theatrical narrative building and factual exposition. For audiences trying to discern what is real in a cloud of conflicting messages, Crockett's method offered a template for critical evaluation. She didn't just counter Carlson's claims, she provided the tools for others to assess such claims on their own, modeling media literacy in action. The divide between narrative and fact is also reflected in how the two figures engage their respective audiences. Carlson's communication style is aggressive and often relies on framing himself as a victim of a hostile establishment, which in turn justifies his combative tone and speculative content. Crockett's approach, in contrast, is rooted in calm logic, informed critique, and a clear distinction between opinion and fact. This difference reflects broader trends in American politics, where one side may increasingly lean into narrative-driven emotion, while the other struggles to maintain a foothold in empirical reality. Crockett's confrontation, then, was not merely personal, it represented the clash between two different versions of public discourse, one shaped by ideological storytelling, the other by fact-checked accountability. Her argument also delved into the motivations behind media distortion. She pointed out how sensational narratives often serve financial and political ends. Outrage drives clicks, ratings, and ad revenue, and Carlson's brand of storytelling is tailor-made to exploit these incentives. But beyond profit, these narratives often serve to mobilize a specific political base, reinforcing existing biases and framing opposition voices as threats rather than fellow citizens. Crockett revealed how Carlson's framing often reduces complex issues to simplistic binaries, which in turn contributes to the toxic polarization in public dialogue. Her speech challenged viewers to recognize these tactics and to resist the urge to retreat into echo chambers. Crockett's own rhetorical choices underscored her commitment to precision over provocation. She avoided the inflammatory language often used in punditry, choosing instead to let facts speak for themselves. This allowed her to maintain credibility not only with her political base but with undecided viewers seeking clarity in a landscape crowded with conflicting voices. Her speech was not designed to humiliate Carlson, but to illuminate the gap between his rhetoric and the truth. This distinction is critical in a time when many political exchanges devolve into personal attacks and spectacle. Crockett's demeanor reinforced the idea that integrity in communication matters, especially for those in positions of power and influence. The divergence between narrative and fact also played out in how the public responded to the confrontation. Carlson's segment was quickly embraced by his core audience, many of whom were unlikely to scrutinize the evidence or seek out counterpoints. Crockett's rebuttal, meanwhile, gained traction among viewers who were eager for a substantive response rooted in verification. This division highlights a growing problem in the information ecosystem. Audiences increasingly seek out content that confirms their beliefs, regardless of its factual accuracy. Crockett's challenge to Carlson wasn't just about setting the record straight, it was an effort to break through the confirmation bias that insulates many political viewers from alternative viewpoints. Crockett also addressed the danger of normalizing misinformation through repetition. She emphasized how repeated falsehoods, even when initially questioned, can gradually become accepted as truth through sheer volume and exposure. Carlson's approach relies on this phenomenon, introducing narratives that may seem implausible at first, but which become embedded in public consciousness through repeated presentation. Crockett's strategy was to intercept this process early, challenging false claims before they had time to take root. By doing so, she underscored the importance of timely fact-checking and real-time accountability in public discourse. The broader implications of this narrative versus fact conflict extend far beyond one television segment. Crockett's speech pointed to systemic failures in how media platforms regulate content and how political discourse is incentivized. She questioned the role of tech companies in amplifying misleading narratives and the complicity of political actors who refuse to denounce obvious falsehoods when it serves their interests. Her remarks called for institutional reforms that promote transparency and truthfulness, from journalism standards to legislative hearings. In doing so, she expanded the conversation beyond a one-on-one confrontation to a critique of the entire ecosystem that allows misinformation to thrive. Crockett's emphasis on verified facts as the foundation for political dialogue also served as a rebuke to the increasingly blurred lines between news, opinion, and entertainment. She warned against the dangers of platforms that prioritize engagement metrics over journalistic integrity, where outrage is more profitable than accuracy. By choosing to engage Carlson on the level of factual scrutiny rather than emotional escalation, she reinforced the principle that truth must remain the cornerstone of democratic communication, even in an era dominated by viral soundbites and curated realities. Jasmine Crockett's fiery dismantling of Tucker Carlson's narrative wasn't just a moment of political theater, it marked a broader shift in how elected officials are beginning to approach misinformation and propaganda, especially when it comes from highly influential media personalities. In an era where disinformation can spread faster than truth, and where media platforms often serve as echo chambers rather than watchdogs, Crockett's response signaled a renewed commitment to fighting back, publicly, directly, and unapologetically. Her refusal to let Carlson's claims stand unchallenged wasn't just about defending herself or a particular party, it was a loud and clear declaration that public figures are no longer willing to sit by while media figures distort facts for ideological gain. Crockett's approach represents a new era of accountability, one where progressive leaders are increasingly equipped not only with facts, but with the rhetorical firepower and confidence needed to take on media giants. Her takedown didn't rely on vague rebuttals or passive corrections. Instead, it was a full frontal assault on the very mechanics of disinformation, pointing out the manipulations, naming the distortions, and directly challenging the authority of someone like Carlson, who has long operated without serious pushback from elected officials. Her willingness to confront him directly reflects a shift in strategy among a new wave of lawmakers who understand the power of media influence and are no longer afraid to fight narrative with narrative, fire with fire, and fact with even louder truth. This generational change in political leadership has brought with it a more media-savvy, socially aware, and fearless approach to confronting misinformation. Crockett, like many of her contemporaries, understands that public perception is shaped just as much by cable news clips and viral tweets as by legislation or committee hearings. The traditional reluctance of lawmakers to respond to media provocateurs, often in the interest of appearing above the fray, is now being replaced by a more confrontational style that reflects the urgency of the information crisis. Crockett's boldness in addressing Carlson by name, identifying his distortions, and laying bare the political consequences of his rhetoric shows that younger lawmakers are not afraid to engage on the same platforms and in the same tone that these media figures operate in. Her speech demonstrated an acute awareness of the stakes involved in letting disinformation go unchecked. Carlson, as one of the most prominent right-wing voices in the country, has built a brand on framing partisan opinion as hard truth, often blurring the line between journalism and propaganda. By taking him on directly, Crockett exposed how unchecked commentary can influence policy decisions, sway voter behavior, and even incite public unrest. She brought attention to the real-world consequences of disinformation, from the undermining of public health initiatives to the delegitimization of democratic institutions, and in doing so, reminded viewers that misinformation is not just a rhetorical issue but a public threat. Crockett's confrontation also sent a message to other political leaders who may have been hesitant to speak out. It was a demonstration of strength, a roadmap for how to challenge powerful media figures without losing credibility or composure. She showed that being outspoken does not mean being reckless, that you can be forceful and unapologetic while still being grounded in fact and principle. Her stance encourages a more assertive form of political communication, one that values truth not just as a moral virtue but as a strategic weapon in the fight against propaganda. It offered a clear example of how to stand firm in one's convictions while still maintaining the professionalism expected of public office. Her speech was also notable for how it resonated beyond the political class and reached everyday citizens who are often left feeling overwhelmed or misled by the media landscape. For many viewers, particularly those from marginalized communities, Crockett's courage in calling out misinformation felt like a moment of validation. It was a powerful reminder that someone in power was finally saying what they had long believed, that the so-called evidence, often pushed by media figures like Carlson, is built on half-truths and ideological bias, not on objective reality. This connection between elected representative and audience is crucial in rebuilding trust in public institutions and democratic processes, especially in an era where that trust is rapidly eroding. What makes Crockett's approach even more significant is the cultural and historical weight she carries as a black woman in American politics. Her presence, her voice, and her refusal to be silenced challenge centuries of institutional power structures that have long excluded or marginalized people who look like her. In taking on someone like Carlson, a figure who has often been accused of using dog-whistle politics and racially coded language, Crockett was doing more than fact-checking a TV segment. She was asserting her place in a political and media environment that has historically tried to silence dissenting voices. Her speech was both a defense of truth and a rejection of the idea that only certain people get to define what truth looks like. Her confrontation also contributed to an evolving conversation about the role of women in politics and media. Too often, female politicians, especially women of color, were expected to be polite, deferential, and measured, even in the face of blatant lies or personal attacks. Crockett broke that mold without sacrificing professionalism or decorum. She was sharp without being hostile, direct without being dismissive. She modeled a new kind of leadership that prioritizes authenticity over appeasement, that values honesty over decorum when the truth is under siege. This new model resonates with a generation of voters who are tired of scripted, focus-grouped responses and are craving leaders who are willing to speak hard truths, even when it's uncomfortable or risky. The ripple effects of her speech extended beyond the immediate audience. Her words were picked up and amplified across multiple platforms, social media, news outlets, podcasts, and community forums, ensuring that the message didn't just reach political insiders but everyday people who may not follow politics closely. This widespread reach is part of what makes Crockett's approach so impactful. She understands the power of viral moments, not for self-promotion, but as a means of delivering important truths to people who might otherwise be left in the dark. Her ability to navigate both the formal settings of Congress and the informal spaces of digital discourse allows her to connect with audiences across political, cultural, and generational divides. Crockett's stance against Carlson represents a broader cultural shift, one in which the old rules of political engagement are being rewritten by a new generation that refuses to play defense in the face of lies. It's a shift toward boldness, clarity, and unflinching honesty, qualities that are increasingly necessary in a time when disinformation threatens to overwhelm the public square. Her actions challenge the myth that political decorum requires silence in the face of media manipulation. Instead, she offers a new model of engagement, one that is unafraid to name names, to confront distortions head-on, and to reassert the value of truth in a world too comfortable with its erosion.